A wounded jaguar dragged herself to the village. What happened next shocked everyone. The blood mixed with cold mud as the jaguar's broken body pushed through the wall of vines. Her breath came short, ragged, each inhale scraping from somewhere deep inside. The left hind leg trembled uncontrollably, torn flesh touching wet clay with a viscous sound at every dragging step. She emerged into the clearing like a shattered shadow. Dawn light filtered through the canopy in uneven shafts, illuminating thin smoke rising from the warm earth after the night's rain. She moved forward, lost, dizzy, guided only by instinct that no longer had a name, and something deeper than the wound seemed to follow her. The silence where two cubs had once been. That emptiness was the true shadow she dragged behind. When she stopped, wavering before the still sleeping village, her entire body said what no roar could express. Something terrible had happened, and she had nowhere left to go. The forest behind her breathed in disorder. The acrid smell of crushed leaves, suspended moisture in the air, and above all the dense, unmistakable odor of another jaguar, the male who claimed this territory, came in waves, warnings only a wild animal understands. Last night's dispute, quick and brutal, had left not just the wound on her paw, but the confused memory of her cubs disappearing among ferns. The sound of a branch breaking in the distance made her ears rise for a moment before falling again under the weight of exhaustion. And then, in the middle of this silent chaos, something improbable happened. A blue macaw, observing the scene from above, tilted its head with uncommon attention. It didn't squawk alarm, didn't flee. Instead, it released a short, sharp call, not of panic but of alert, as if pointing out danger to the village, not to itself. The jaguar lifted her gaze, confused, meeting those feathers shimmering in deep blue under the golden light. For a brief instant, two beings that should never recognize each other looked at one another as equals in the same vulnerability. The jaguar's vision blurred at the edges. The clearing seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, expanding, contracting. She tried to remember the path that brought her here, but memory came in fragments. The male's roar splitting the darkness, teeth finding her leg, the desperate scramble through undergrowth with her cub's frightened chirps behind her. Then nothing, only waking to silence and the metallic taste of her own blood. Her cubs. Where were her cubs? The question pounded through her exhausted body with more insistence than pain. She had heard them. She was certain. Their small voices calling for her as she fought, as she fled. But when she finally stopped running, when her leg could carry her no further, and she collapsed in a hollow beneath massive roots, there had been only forest sounds. No cubs, no answering calls when she tried to growl for them through her damaged throat. The macaw landed on a lower branch, closer now, close enough that the jaguar could see individual feathers, each one a different shade of blue, cerulean, sapphire, midnight. The bird's black eyes studied her with an intelligence that felt unsettling. Animals looked at each other in the forest, yes, but not like this. Not with this kind of focused attention that seemed to see past fur and muscle into something deeper. The jaguar's body wanted to react, wanted to hiss to warn this strange bird away from a predator, but she had no strength for displays. Her leg throbbed with each pulse, and when she looked down she could see the gash, a diagonal tear through muscle, still seeping dark blood into the mud beneath her. The edges were ragged, dirt already working into the wound. In the jungle, that meant infection. That meant fever. That meant death, slower and more terrible than the male's teeth would have been. The village before her was small. 6 structures built on stilts, thatched roofs still dark with last night's rain. Smoke rose from only one, a thin grey line climbing toward the canopy. The humans would wake soon. When they did, they would see her. And then, the jaguar didn't know what then. In her life, humans meant noise and fire, the crack of gunshots, the acrid smell that made every instinct scream to run. But running was no longer possible. The macaw made a sound, not a squawk, but something softer, almost conversational. It hopped along the branch, head bobbing, never taking its eye off the jaguar. Then it spread its wings, that shocking blue against green, and glided down to a fallen log barely 10 feet from where the jaguar lay. The jaguar's muscles tensed, too close. The bird was too close. But again, her body betrayed her. She could not even lift her head properly, let alone lunge. The macaw seemed to understand this. It cleaned its feathers methodically, pulling each one through its curved beak, as if demonstrating that it held no fear of the collapsed predator before it. Time passed in strange increments. The light changed. The smoke from the village thickened as more fires were lit. Voices drifted across the clearing. Human voices, rising and falling in a language the Jaguar didn't understand, but whose rhythms felt ancient, connected somehow to the forest itself. The macaw remained, sometimes preening, sometimes simply watching, its presence inexplicably steadying. The Jaguar's eyes closed. Not sleep, but something close to surrender. Her body had carried her as far as it could, whether death came from the male returning, from infection, from humans with their fire sticks, or simply from the slow dimming of her own failing heart. It no longer seemed to matter. She had tried. She had fought. She had searched for her cubs until her body gave out. That would have to be enough. But even in this moment of letting go, her ears remained alert. Tracking sounds. The macaw's slight movements. The distant cry of howler monkeys greeting the morning. The soft pad of footsteps. Her eyes snapped open. A human, walking toward her. The first thunderclap came like an ancestral warning, rolling heavy through the forest's belly. The Jaguar tried to rise, to run, but her leg buckled and she collapsed again with a whimper that shamed her. The human stopped. A woman, old, her face deeply lined with years under the jungle sun. She held no weapon. Her hands were empty, raised slightly, palms forward in a gesture the Jaguar couldn't interpret. The woman spoke, low rhythmic words that meant nothing but somehow carried no threat. The macaw answered, that same sharp, short call from before. The woman's eyes flicked to the bird, then back to the Jaguar, and something in her weathered face shifted. Recognition, understanding, as if the bird had communicated something essential. The second thunderclap was closer. In seconds, the sky opened. Rain hammered down, cold, almost solid, turning the world into sheets of grey water. It drummed on leaves, thickened the mud, washed over the Jaguar's face and down her wounded leg. The water felt like punishment and relief at once, cleaning the gash even as it made her shiver uncontrollably. The woman didn't move. She stood in the downpour, letting it soak through her clothes, her eyes never leaving the Jaguar. Then the sounds changed. Deep in the forest, barely audible beneath the rain, the heavy tread of something large moving through undergrowth. The male. The Jaguar could smell him now, that overwhelming male musk marking territory, claiming what was his. He was coming to finish what he'd started, to ensure no rival female would raise cubs in his domain, to eliminate the wounded threat before she could recover. The Jaguar tried to turn her body, to face him, to at least die meeting the attack head-on. But her muscles wouldn't obey. The woman saw, she understood, and she did something the Jaguar would never forget. She screamed, not at the Jaguar, into the forest, into the rain. A piercing cry that cut through thunder and downpour, a sound of pure defiance. Other voices joined, more humans emerging from the village, men and women both, banging metal against metal, lighting torches that hissed and smoked in the rain. They didn't approach the Jaguar. They formed a line between her and the forest, creating a barrier of noise and light and human presence. The male's steps stopped. The Jaguar could hear him circling, testing, trying to understand this new equation. But he was young, still learning his territory. The cacophony of humans confused him, threatened him, made him recalculate whether this kill was worth the risk. Finally, his footsteps receded. Slowly at first, then faster, until the jungle swallowed him completely and there was only rain. The Jaguar lay in the mud, body shaking. She didn't understand what had just happened. Humans had protected her. The thought made no sense in her vocabulary of survival. Humans were predators just like the male, maybe more dangerous. Yet they had driven him away, had stood between death and a wounded animal they should have feared, should have killed, should have driven off their land. The woman approached again, closer this time but still maintaining distance. She crouched in the mud, her old knees popping, and placed something on the ground. Leaves. Broad, thick leaves the Jaguar recognized, the ones that stopped bleeding, that the forest whispered held healing. The woman backed away, returning to the village, and the macaw swooped down to land beside the leaves. The bird looked at the Jaguar, then at the leaves, then back at the Jaguar. The message was unmistakable. These are for you. The Jaguar wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance between wild and human, between predator and prey, between the forest and the village, but her leg throbbed with such intensity that each heartbeat felt like teeth sinking deeper into muscle. Slowly, painfully, she dragged herself forward until she could reach the leaves with her nose. The macaw hopped closer still. It selected one leaf in its beak, and with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a bird's hard bill, began pressing it against the wound. The jaguar flinched, but didn't strike. The sensation was strange, not painful exactly, but foreign. The leaf's natural oils seeped into torn flesh, and something in the plant's chemistry began dulling the sharp edges of pain. The macaw worked with focused precision, covering the gash completely, then weighing the leaves down with small stones it collected from the clearing's edge. When it finished, the bird stepped back and preened one wing, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. A macaw tending to a jaguar's wounds, while rain fell like silver needles through morning light. The rain continued through the day, not the violent downpour of the storm, but steady, persistent tropical rain that turned everything liquid. The clearing became a shallow lake. The village remained on its stilts, lights glowing warm in the grey afternoon. The jaguar stayed where she was, too exhausted to move even if her leg had allowed it. The macaw never left. It perched on the same log, occasionally flying to the village and back, as if checking on both the wounded cat and the humans who had defended her. Sometimes it called out, those sharp, clear notes, and the old woman would appear on her porch, looking across the waterlogged clearing. No words exchanged, just acknowledgement of presence. As darkness fell, the jaguar's thoughts turned again to her cubs. The silence of their absence was louder than any forest sound. She remembered their birth, the wet, blind helplessness of them, how they had nursed and grown strong in the den she'd carved beneath a massive kapok tree. She remembered teaching them to stalk, their clumsy pounces on leaves and beetles making her chest rumble, with what humans might call affection, but what she knew simply as rightness. The male had come at the worst time. The cubs were old enough to follow her, but not old enough to defend themselves. When he attacked, roaring his challenge in the darkness, she had tried to lead him away from them, had charged him head-on, accepting wounds to buy time for her cubs to hide. She thought, she hoped, she had heard them scrambling into the densest part of the undergrowth, into places even a full-grown jaguar couldn't follow, but she hadn't heard them since, and the guilt of that was worse than any physical pain. Had they survived? Were they huddled somewhere, crying for her, slowly starving? Or had the male found them after defeating her, crushing their small skulls with one bite, the way males do when claiming territory? The jaguar closed her eyes against images she couldn't bear. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw only her cubs' faces, their spotted fur still kitten-soft, their eyes bright with discovery and trust. She woke to the macaw's alarm call. Dawn was breaking through persistent mist, turning the forest into a cathedral of shadows and filtered gold. The jaguar's body felt heavy, wrong, fever climbing through her blood from the infected wound. Her vision swam. But the macaw's distress was clear, and some instinct deeper than sickness made her lift her head. Movement at the forest's edge. Multiple shapes, too small to be adult jaguars. Hope and fear collided in her chest. She tried to call out, to make the low contact sound that her cubs knew as safety, but her throat produced only a broken rasp. The shapes disappeared. The macaw circled, agitated, calling repeatedly into the forest. The jaguar's heart sank. She had been wrong. Fever dreams mixing with desperate hope. Her cubs were gone. She needed to accept that. But the macaw wouldn't stop. It flew into the forest, returned, flew again. A pattern so insistent that even through her fever haze, the jaguar understood. The bird was trying to tell her something. Then she heard it. Faint, almost lost in the morning chorus of birds and insects. A sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. The questioning chirp of a jaguar cub. Every muscle in her body tried to respond. She dragged herself forward 6 inches, then 12. Pain screamed through her leg, but she didn't care. That sound meant life, meant hope, meant everything her wounded body had been protecting. She called again, louder this time, forcing sound through damaged vocal cords, calling her cubs home. The response was immediate. 2 voices now overlapping, excited, frightened, confused, getting closer. The macaw landed on her back, an audacious move that would normally trigger attack, and called toward the forest, as if saying, "Here, she's here. Come." And they came. 2 cubs emerged from the ferns, soaked and thin and trembling. Their spots seemed too large for their bodies, their eyes too wide with the terror of the past day and night. They saw her and froze, as if unable to believe their eyes. Then the smaller one, the female, always bolder, ran forward in an uncoordinated gallop that was half leap, half stumble. She crashed into her mother's side, burrowing into wet fur, making sounds that were half purr, half cry. The larger male followed more cautiously, circling once before pressing against her other side. The jaguar curved her body around them, as much as her wounded leg allowed, breathing in their scent, licking their faces, making the rumbling contact sounds that meant safety and pack and home. The macaw watched from its perch. The old woman appeared on her porch again, and when she saw the cubs, her weathered face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it seemed to light the misty dawn. The fever still burned in the jaguar's body. The wound still throbbed. But with her cubs pressed against her, their small bodies warm and alive and real, something else burned brighter: purpose. She had survived not to die, but to be found. Her body had known what her conscious mind couldn't articulate, that if she could just stay alive, just hold on long enough, her cubs would follow her trail as they'd been learning to do, that they would find her where she'd collapsed, in this strange intersection between jungle and village, wild and human. The macaw hopped down to the ground. It approached the cubs, who watched it with kitten curiosity. One batted at a blue tail feather with a tiny paw. The bird tolerated this with dignified patience, then returned to its work, checking the jaguar's wound, adjusting the leaves that had shifted during the night. The old woman descended from her porch. She carried something wrapped in banana leaves. Fish, the jaguar could smell. Fresh fish from the river. She placed it at the clearing's edge and retreated. The male cub's nose twitched. He was hungry, they both were. But they looked to their mother first, checking whether this was safe. The jaguar didn't know how to answer that question. Nothing about this situation fit her understanding of survival. But her cubs needed food. She needed food. And the female human had earned something through her actions last night. If not trust, then at least consideration. She gave a soft grunt. Permission. The cubs darted forward, seized the fish and dragged it back to her side to eat. The old woman watched this with satisfaction, then returned to her village, leaving them in peace. Days passed like water. The jaguar remained at the clearing's edge, where shade from massive cecropia trees provided coolness, and a small stream offered fresh water. Her fever broke on the second night, sweated out through hours of delirium during which she dreamed of running through endless forest, always searching, never finding. When she woke, the macaw was sleeping on a branch directly above her, one eye occasionally opening to check on its patient. The cubs gained confidence. They played in the shallows of the stream, pouncing on minnows and their own reflections. Sometimes human children appeared at the village edge and watched them with wonder. The jaguar watched back, her body tense but not aggressive. A silent agreement seemed to form. Neither side would cross the invisible line that divided the clearing. The old woman came each morning and evening with food, never approaching directly, always leaving it at the same spot, always withdrawing. The jaguar ate what was offered, because her body needed strength to heal and to produce milk for her cubs. The macaw ate too, sharing seeds and fruits that villagers left for it, its presence apparently as accepted as the jaguar's temporary residence. The wound began to close, slowly, with setbacks and small infections that the macaw seemed to know how to treat with different leaves, different plants pulled from the forest's infinite pharmacy. The jaguar's body knitted itself back together with the stubborn persistence of wild things that understand survival as the only option. Her cubs thrived, growing visibly stronger each day, their play becoming more coordinated, their hunting practice on insects and small lizards showing the foundation of skills they would need. But the jaguar knew this couldn't last. The village had offered sanctuary, but it wasn't home. The forest was home. The territory she'd claimed before the male came was home. She needed to return. Needed to teach her cubs to hunt properly, to mark territory, to understand their place in the vast web of predator and prey that governed the jungle. The question was when, and whether the male would be waiting. On the 8th morning, the jaguar stood, weight on all 4 legs. The wounded one protested but held. She took a step, then another. The cubs tumbled around her, excited by this change. The macaw landed on her back again, that presumptuous bird, and rode there as if this too were natural. The old woman watched from her porch. The jaguar met her eyes across the clearing. Something passed between them that had no words in any language. Gratitude, perhaps. Mutual respect, certainly. Recognition that what had happened here was rare. A moment when the usual rules had bent, when vulnerability had been answered with protection rather than exploitation. The jaguar turned toward the forest, toward home. But she didn't head back the way she'd come. Not toward the territory where the male had defeated her. She angled south, toward a part of the forest she'd explored only briefly before, drawn by the scent of prey and the sound of water running over ancient stones. New territory. Unclaimed space where a female with cubs might establish herself without immediately confronting a dominant male. The cubs followed, and the macaw flew ahead, its blue plumage bright against green shadows. The bird called back to them as if saying, "This way, I know the paths, trust me." And impossibly the jaguar did. This bird had protected her, tended her, and refused to abandon her when every natural instinct should have driven it away from a predator. If it wanted to lead them now, she would follow, at least for a while, at least until the forest revealed its own direction. They traveled slowly. The jaguar's leg was healing, but not healed. Every few hours she needed to rest, to let her cubs nurse, to drink from streams and listen to the forest's voices for signs of danger. The macaw proved itself an excellent scout. It would fly ahead, then return with news expressed in calls and movements that the jaguar was learning to interpret. This way meant clear path. That urgent squawk meant danger. A snake on the trail, a particularly aggressive troop of monkeys, once a human hunter whose scent had startled the bird. The cubs treated the macaw as part of their family. They tried to pounce on it during rest stops, learning quickly that the bird was faster than their clumsy kitten reflexes could handle, but it played with them in its way, leading them in chase games through clearings, stealing bits of their food and making them hunt it down, teaching them about birds as prey without either party taking it seriously. On the third day of travel, they heard howler monkeys roaring their territorial challenge from nearby canopy. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder, and the cubs pressed against their mother in fear. The macaw flew up to investigate, and when it returned, it performed an elaborate dance on a branch, bobbing, flapping, calling in an agitated way that clearly meant different troop, new territory. We've left the old lands behind. The jaguar understood. They had crossed invisible boundaries. Whatever came next would be theirs to claim or die trying. But for now, the forest felt open, unclaimed. Prey was abundant. She could smell peccary and agouti, hear the splash of fish in streams. This was good land. Land worth fighting for if necessary. But she was tired of fighting. Tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The wound had healed mostly, but something in her spirit needed healing too. And so when they found a massive fallen tree, its root system creating a natural shelter, its hollow interior large enough for her and both cubs, she decided this would be home, at least for now. At least until her cubs were older and she was stronger and the world demanded movement again. The weeks that followed established a rhythm, unlike anything the jaguar had known before. She hunted at dusk and dawn, teaching her cubs to stalk by showing them how to move through undergrowth without sound. The male cub was stronger, but the female was cleverer, understanding instinctively how to use shadows and wind direction. They brought down their first agouti together, a clumsy, chaotic hunt that ended with the prey escaping before the jaguar herself killed it. But the cubs had tasted the thrill of chase, and she saw in their eyes the beginning of what they would become. The macaw built a nest in a tree above their shelter. This shocked her at first. Birds don't nest near predators. But this bird had its own logic. During the day, while the jaguar and her cubs slept, the macaw would fly off on its own errands. But it always returned before dark, settling into its nest with familiar comfort, occasionally calling down to them as if checking in. One evening the jaguar heard something that made her blood freeze, the roar of a male jaguar, different from the one who'd wounded her. This voice was deeper, older, more confident, claiming this territory as his. She gathered her cubs into the shelter and prepared to defend them with whatever remained in her scarred body. But the macaw did something extraordinary. It flew straight toward the roaring, calling loudly in alarm. The jaguar heard the commotion, the male's roar shifting to confusion, the sound of him backing away from the strange bird attacking him, squawking and diving at his head. The macaw harassed him for over an hour, never letting him settle, never allowing him to establish the calm required for scent marking and territorial display. Finally, the male left, and the macaw returned, a few feathers disheveled but otherwise unhurt, looking insufferably pleased with itself. The jaguar stared at this bird, this impossible, brave, ridiculous bird that had appointed itself guardian of a jaguar family. She did something she'd never done with another species before. She groomed it. Carefully, gently, she licked the macaw's ruffled feathers with her rough tongue, settling them back into place. The bird leaned into her touch, making soft sounds of contentment, and in that moment, the jaguar understood that whatever this was, this strange alliance between predator and bird, between wounded mother and healing guardian, it was real. It was pack. It was family in a way that transcended species and instinct and everything the forest had taught her about survival. The cubs grew through the seasons. The female developed her mother's stealth, her ability to become invisible even in sparse cover. The male developed raw power, his shoulders broadening, his jaw strengthening. They hunted together now, not just practicing but feeding themselves, though they still returned to the shelter, still sought their mother's presence. The macaw grew older too. Its feathers lost some of their brilliant shine, and it flew shorter distances, but it remained with them, a constant blue presence in their daily lives. It had taught the cubs things no jaguar mother could teach: how to read weather patterns by bird behavior, how to find certain medicinal plants, even how to steal from human settlements when hunting was poor. The jaguar had learned from the bird too. She had learned that survival sometimes meant accepting help from unexpected sources, that vulnerability wasn't always weakness, that the lines between species, between wild and tame, between forest and village, were less fixed than she'd believed. One morning, she woke to find both cubs gone, not taken. Their scent trails led away from the shelter in different directions, marked with the confidence of young adults ready to establish their own territories. The female had gone north into dense jungle. The male had gone east toward the river. Both had left signs that she could read. "We're ready. Thank you. We'll survive because you survived." The jaguar should have felt loss. Every instinct said a mother should mourn her cub's departure, but instead she felt something closer to pride. She had brought them from blind helplessness to capable hunters, through injury and fever and the strange sanctuary of a human village, through alliance with an impossible bird and crossing unknown territories. She had given them life and the tools to keep it. The macaw landed beside her, just the two of them now, as it had been in the beginning. The bird's black eye studied her, and she wondered what it would do. Would it leave too, return to its own kind, its own life? But the macaw settled into its usual perch, preened one wing, and made a sound that might have been contentment. It had chosen this strange life, just as she had been forced into it, and neither seemed inclined to change. Years passed in the way they do for jungle creatures, measured in seasons of rain and sun, in successful hunts and lean times, in the slow accumulation of scars and wisdom. The jaguar's wounded leg healed fully, but remained stiff in cold weather. The macaw's feathers grayed further, its flights shorter and more labored. They had become a fixture in this part of the forest. Other animals grew accustomed to the strange pair: the jaguar who tolerated a bird on her back, the macaw that roosted near a predator. Occasionally, human hunters passed through, and when they saw the pair, they would stop and stare, then move on without raising weapons. Stories had spread from the village: the wounded jaguar and the bluebird, the healing that defied nature, the strange mercy that had passed between species. One evening, as the jaguar drank from a stream, she caught scent of something familiar. Her head lifted. She scanned the forest, every sense alert. Then she saw them. Two young jaguars, spotted patterns, distinctive and known. Her cubs, now full-grown, magnificent in their strength. The female approached first, making the contact sound that meant family. She touched noses with her mother, and they stood together for a long moment, breathing each other in. The male stayed back, more cautious, but his eyes held recognition, and something that might have been respect. Behind the female, two tiny cubs stumbled into view, the jaguar's grandchildren. New life, continuing the chain. The macaw watched from above, and if a bird could smile, this one did. The young jaguars stayed through the evening, resting in their old shelter, letting the cubs play under their grandmother's watchful eye. But they didn't stay the night. They had their own territories now, their own lives to live. Before dawn, They departed, the female touching noses once more, the male rumbling a goodbye. The jaguar watched them disappear into the forest, the circle completing itself. Life finding a way forward, as it always did. She thought of that terrible night, bleeding, exhausted, stumbling toward a human village with no hope left. She thought of the strange bird that had chosen to help instead of flee, of the old woman who had driven away death with nothing but noise and courage, of the impossible journey that had led her here, to this quiet stream, to this peaceful territory, to this moment of watching her bloodline continue into the future. The macaw descended to her back, settling there with familiar weight. The jaguar felt the bird's heartbeat, quick and light against her own muscular shoulders. Two creatures that should never have trusted each other, that nature had designed as indifferent at best. Yet here they were, old companions in a forest that had witnessed their unlikely alliance. The day came when the macaw didn't wake. The jaguar nudged the bird's still body gently, knowing but not accepting. She had hunted enough to recognize death, but this was different. This was loss. She carried the bird in her jaws to a place she knew, a small clearing where afternoon light fell through the canopy in a single shaft, warming a patch of soft moss. She laid the macaw there, arranging the blue feathers with her nose until they caught the light, making the bird look as if it might fly again if the sun just warmed it enough. For 3 days, she stayed beside the body, guarding it from scavengers, from insects, from the forest's hunger that consumed all things. On the 3rd evening, a pair of macaws flew overhead, the first she'd seen in this territory in years. They called down to the clearing, a complex series of sounds that might have been a song or a goodbye, or simply acknowledgement that one of their kind lay below. The jaguar didn't chase them. She watched them circle once, twice, then disappear into the canopy. And she understood that it was time to let the forest take back what it had lent her. Time to release this strange companion who had saved her life and changed everything she knew about survival. She left the clearing at dawn and didn't return. But for the rest of her life, whenever she passed that way, she would stop and listen. And sometimes, perhaps only imagination, perhaps something more, she would hear a sharp, clear call in the distance, a sound that meant, "All is well. I'm watching. You're not alone." The old woman in the village died in her sleep during a quiet, dry season. Her grandchildren prepared her body according to their traditions and spoke of her life, the plants she had known, the animals she had protected, the strange mercy she had shown to a wounded jaguar years ago. They said she had taught them that the forest and the village were not separate things, but parts of one living whole that breathed together. On the night of the old woman's death, the jaguar stood at the clearing's edge, where she had once collapsed. The village looked different now. Some houses rebuilt, some new faces, children grown into adults who remembered her only from stories. But the smell of wood smoke was the same. The sound of voices in the darkness was the same. She didn't know how she knew the old woman had died. Animals don't understand human funerals or human grief. But something in the air that night felt changed, as if the forest had lost one of its own translators, someone who could speak both languages, walk between both worlds. The jaguar stayed until dawn, then turned back to her territory. She never returned to the village, but the connection remained woven into her bones, into the story of her survival. She had been saved not by strength or cunning or any of the things that usually determined life and death in the jungle. She had been saved by mercy, by choice, by the strange, improbable compassion of an old woman and a blue bird. The jaguar lived longer than most of her kind. Her body wore down slowly, teeth dulling, joints stiffening, the wound in her leg aching in cold weather. But she hunted well enough to feed herself, found shelter in her familiar hollow tree, moved through her territory with the confidence of a creature who had earned every inch of ground she claimed. She saw her grandchildren occasionally, then great-grandchildren, new spots in the forest, carrying her genes forward, each generation stronger for the survival instinct she had passed down, the knowledge that life finds a way, even through impossible circumstances. One morning in the wet season, she simply didn't rise. Her body had reached its limit, all the hunts and fights and seasons finally adding up to an equation that couldn't balance anymore. She lay in her shelter, listening to rain drum on leaves, breathing in the smell of wet earth and growing things. The forest continued around her. Birds called, monkeys shrieked. Somewhere nearby, an agouti rustled through undergrowth, unaware of the predator too weak to hunt it. life flowing on, indifferent and infinite. As the jaguar's breathing slowed, she heard something that might have been memory or might have been real. A sharp, clear call cutting through rain sounds. That familiar voice saying what it had always said, "I'm here, I'm watching, you're safe." She closed her eyes and let go, slipping away as gently as she had once stumbled into the village clearing. Wounded, lost, but somehow, against all odds, found. The old ones in the village tell this story still. They speak of the day a wounded jaguar dragged herself to their edge and stayed long enough to heal. They speak of the macaw that tended her, the old woman who protected her, the mercy that flowed between species when it should have been impossible. They tell it to children who don't quite believe, who think it's a tale invented to teach lessons about kindness or the forest's mysteries. But then those children grow up and spend time in the jungle, and sometimes they see things that make them wonder. A jaguar that tolerates birds on its back, a macaw that calls warnings when predators approach. Moments of unlikely alliance that suggest the borders between wild things are more permeable than we assume. The story lives because it holds truth that transcends fact. It reminds listeners that in the deepest jungle, where survival is the only law and death waits in every shadow, life still finds ways to protect itself that don't involve teeth and claws. Sometimes it finds mercy. Sometimes it finds help from impossible sources. Sometimes a wounded predator stumbles toward humans and discovers that the thing she feared might be the thing that saves her. And sometimes, perhaps rarely, perhaps more often than we know, the Amazon holds space for miracles that aren't miracles at all, but simply the natural consequence of choosing compassion when instinct demands violence. The forest remembers. The village remembers. And somewhere in the green cathedral of trees and vines and filtered sunlight, that memory continues, woven into the land itself. A wounded jaguar, a blue bird, an old woman, and the strange, beautiful moment when they all chose to save a life instead of ending one. The night doesn't forgive easily, but sometimes when conditions align and the forest breathes deep and beings from different worlds recognize each other's vulnerability, sometimes it protects.